Is the writing on the wall for the Church of England?
There is a hope that the new Archbishop can be something of a pastor and that can kind of go before the political aspects of the job. I think, though, the media noise around the appointment that will inevitably come and the manner of the departure of Justin Welby is only going to sort of ramp that up even further. And it means that actually, I think the new Archbishop's chances of effectively being able to be that pastor is going to depend on them first ticking off the political boxes.
Francis Martin, a writer for the Church Times, speaking on the Religion Media Centre briefing, who will be the next Archbishop of Canterbury? Felicity, is that the story? Who is going to be the next Archbishop of Canterbury, or is it something else?
We don't know, but it's expected to be announced in the next few weeks. But my story is that recent polling suggests that nobody actually cares who is elected. So 3/4 of people do not care who becomes the next Archbishop of Canterbury, and that's according to new polling.
And that includes Christians?
It does include Christians. So it wasn't a terribly big sample, I should make that clear. It was 1,100 British people. But out of the 505 who identified as Christian, not necessarily only those from a COV background, 62% also felt this way. So it sort of feels like the Church of England is gearing up to this, the biggest appointment ever. And I just thought it was very interesting that the polling suggests that, maybe people don't really care. But also the polling suggested that most people surveyed don't want the next Archbishop to be overtly political or even a little bit political. They're fine for he or she to focus on charity and homelessness, but they don't want a leader who's going to wade into the big, political debates. So we don't care who it is, firstly, but whoever it is, please don't be too political.
And is that a response then to Justin Welby, who was the previous Archbishop of Canterbury, who didn't leave for political reasons? He left for his role in not reporting a sexual abuse scandal. But, if you ask the general public, what do you think of Justin Welby? A lot of them will have mentioned that we popped up on the news a lot, talking about a kind of Christian perspective on news stories. That's what people don't want?
My feeling is that Justin Welby has certainly left a very long, dark shadow that has just been a massive stain on the church that I'm not surprised if it has, put people off the Church of England entirely. Just a recap on that, he announced his resignation last November over the role he played in the John Smythe abuse, which was really just appalling, sadistic treatment by John Smythe of men and young boys. And an independent review found that Justin Welby, who was at one point one of John Smythe's good friends, this report found that Welby could and should have reported the abuse much sooner, and that Smythe should have been brought to justice, and he wasn't. And then Welby followed up by initially refusing to resign over the release of the report, and 1,500 church members had to call on him to step down, and eventually he stepped down. And then in March this year, it was a very tone-deaf statement from Welby saying that he had forgiven Smythe, which only again further to kind of inflame the whole thing. So it has been a lot of soul searching and a lot of damage to the Church of England. And when you consider that it only took 17 days for the Catholic Church to get their new Pope early this year, it has also taken a long time since the end of last year to find someone.
I must say, I thought we had a new Archbishop of Canterbury because I saw someone on the news. Turns out that was the Archbishop of York filling in, doing the role whilst they're waiting. Yes. Yeah, it is taking a really long time. Jessica, are you surprised that people don't care who the Archbishop of Canterbury is going to be?
No, I'm not surprised at all. I'm not even sure what the Archbishop of Canterbury does. I don't know what his official job is. I mean, I know who he is and where he sort of sits in the hierarchy of the church, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's partially because I'm not from here. I'm American. But I think, especially if the only reason that you're really hearing about or talking about the church these days is when you're talking about scandal, it's not at all surprising to me that people don't really have interest in knowing who the next leader is going to be. I also don't find it particularly surprising that they're struggling to get people to come to church, which is really interesting. And they seem to be torn between this decision of should we try to get more young people in, try to appeal to the next generation, or should we spend more time paying more close attention to the people who are already coming to church? The older generations, like we're torn between these two sides, which is interesting. And I think there's a real opportunity because, I think young people in particular are looking for meaning, and some of them are turning to religion, and actually some of them are turning to the Church of England. There was a survey out in April that found that church attendance in England and Wales has actually increased 50% over the past 6 years, which goes against the current narrative that we've heard. But it was really interesting that young people were the second largest demographic in attendance. And I think these are really troubled times, and I think a lot of young people have grown up in very difficult experience a lot of really awful things in the world, and especially right now their futures look particularly bleak. The climate crisis, there's wars all over the world. Everything feels really dark, and so I'm not surprised that young people would be looking for guidance there. So I think the church has a real opportunity to try and bring these people in. It's just a matter of how they manage to do that. And what kind of narratives they go for, whether or not they decide to make it political or not.
Yeah, that is interesting if young people means, people in their late teens and early 20s rather than toddlers who are dragged along by their parents to messy play. But Felicity, can you enlighten Jessica on what the role of the Archbishop of Canterbury is? Because it is actually a formal role for everybody in this country, isn't it? Which is still on paper a Christian country. They're in the House of Lords and all the rest of it.
He sits at the top of the church, really. His most prominent role, I suppose, recently has been to appoint the king. So that's his big duty, is to appoint the next monarch.
Appoint as in by putting the crown on his head, not by doing a job interview. There was only one candidate.
No. Yes, putting the crown on top of the head. Yeah. And does wade into, Welby certainly waded into all sorts of political debates. And also there is one of Welby's legacies is that there's this historical endowment fund, which is actually quite substantial. At the moment, it stands at £11 billion. So also part of the decision-making and conversations about what happens to that money, which is a lot. And under Welby, Welby was very interested in kind of starting new churches to attract more people in. One famous example was a Chinese takeaway turned church in Rochdale. And there's a lot of kind of infighting, I guess, in the church over that, because obviously a lot of parishes across the country are in absolute decline. They are literally falling apart at the seams. And I think a lot of churchgoers feel that a lot of money, should be better handed out and, better spent on the churches that do exist and are crumbling rather than on finding new kinds of ministry. So actually does hold quite a lot of power and quite a lot of sway, I would say. Yeah,
and also I guess soft power too, particularly in rural communities, right? You get a Church of England school, or the church is one of the things that a village has. You've got a church and a pub, basically, and that has a role in people's lives, whether they're Christian or not.
Yes, absolutely. And some people would argue that you saw evidence of that at the recent Unite the Kingdom protests by the far right, that there actually was this Christian presence there. I think there were banners saying Christ is King. There was a rendition of Jerusalem that was sang. Obviously, Tommy Robinson claims he was led to Christ while in prison. So it did feel like I think there were some people dressed as crusaders, maybe. But there was this Christian presence. And on the one hand, you could say this, no pun intended, they were not doing this in good faith. They were doing this to try and spread hatred and fear and division. And actually, they have no intention of going back to church, and that they just want to kind of intimidate anyone with brown skin. On the other hand, could you say that some people feel that British Christian cultural traditions are under threat, whether that's your school, whether that's the baptisms, whether that's the part of fabric that makes Britain Britain, and that they were protesting that. Yeah, and young men in particular are turning more to religion, and this is happening both in the US and in the UK. And here in the UK, 21% of men ages 18 to 24 say they attend church at least once a month now, and that's compared with just 12% of young women.
And there's lots of theories for why this is, and they range from kind to not particularly kind. One idea is that men are simply less educated than women and therefore more likely to sort of believe in God and turn to religion, which is not very kind theory. And then another theory is that men feel quite emasculated by the current state of the world, and that the rise of women in the workforce, that their position in the family has been demoted, and they're turning to the church for new sources of meaning. But I think it speaks to the general sort of like men in crisis narrative that we have heard a lot about. So it's interesting to ask sort of why it's specifically about men. And the other thing that I thought was really interesting, that men are turning to Catholicism a lot. Catholicism is now more popular than Anglicanism with young people here in the UK, which is fascinating. And you have to kind of ask, like, what are the Catholics doing that these young men like so much? And especially if the argument is that, like, people don't want their churches to be political or to wade into politics or to have any opinion on politics. I think that has not been at all the case for Catholics lately, especially with the most recent two popes. Those two popes have been very outspoken about their views on immigration and about climate change and about various wars. Those are moral issues, but like political decisions are based in moral decisions, right? And so, it's a really interesting trend to see sort of Catholicism try and like sort of bounce back from its years and years and years of crisis and of controversy and scandal, and actually seeing some success there. You wonder what the Catholic Church is really getting right with young people, and in particularly with young men.
The other thing they can do, Felicity, to clearly send a signal that this isn't Justin Welby, is to appoint a woman. We've never had a female Archbishop of Canterbury. Do you think we might get one this time?
Possibly. There are a couple of women in the running, I think. So I think the front leader is Guli Francis Dakani, who is the Bishop of Chelmsford and was a child refugee from Iran. There's also Sarah Mullally, who is the current Bishop of London and a former NHS Chief Nursing Officer. And I think she's been quite vocal in the assisted dying debate. So actually maybe she would be quite a political Archbishop if she was appointed. I think the CNC, the Crown Nominations Commission, who is the group of 17 who get together to vote on who it should be, and is interestingly enough led by the former Director General of MI5. I think they have said there's no reason why it couldn't be a woman, but it doesn't necessarily mean it will be a woman. I think Michael Beasley, the Bishop of Bath and Wells, is also in the mix. So yeah, maybe, but maybe not.
I mean, regardless of who it is, I get the sense it's a slightly impossible job, this. You've got the dual responsibility of holding to account this enormous organisation that you described, with its endowments and its crumbling buildings and its managerial responsibilities, and at the same time being a charismatic, open public face who says the right thing but doesn't say the wrong thing. I mean, who embodies that? It's almost too much to do, isn't it? It's like being Prime Minister and King.
I read that in quite a few articles that I came across. There was a lot of like, who on earth would take on this role? Like, honestly, who would want this role? And I was like, it doesn't really speak to like the Christian spirit, does it? I mean, a truly good Christian would probably take this impossible job just to do it for the joy of serving and the humility and the opportunity to serve and, do something good for the position. So fingers crossed someone has that mentality rather than everyone just being like, no, thank you.
Yeah. Fingers crossed doesn't seem like a very Christian perspective either.